everyone, and thank you for joining us for this panel discussion. I would like to start today with a quote from the American disability rights activist, Judith Hoyman. It is no longer acceptable to not have women at the table. It is no longer acceptable to not have people of colour at the table, but no one thinks to see if the table is accessible. And this really forms the crux of what I want to address on the panel today. We want to talk about what truly makes an inclusive employer when it comes to disability and when it comes to making your business disability friendly. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is something that has actually come up in our preamble here today with our wonderful panelists, and it's around terminology. It wasn't a question we were going to add today to the panel, but we have decided to put it in because it's so vital to talk about these things, and especially because I know that in the audience there will be a lot of policymakers. So I know that there is a big call within the disability community at the moment to be using the correct terminology, and especially, as I say, we're making policy, this is really important. And using the term disabled person is generally considered sort of how people want to be referred to. However, there has been a history of using the term person with disabilities, and we know that that is still quite prevalent here today. So I'd like to start by putting it to the panel and kind of ask what you're most comfortable with and which terminology you would prefer became the dominant terminology in the future.
You should always go with the majority vote. So even when you're talking about autism, you always that some people are split. Some people appreciate identity first and others appreciate person first. But on the whole, it is the majority rules, even if there's, kind of a rumble in the jungle, so to speak, amongst the community. And it's always down to the disability community. It's not down to anyone. It's not down to parents, carers, key workers. You find a lot of parents go, well, I feel uncomfortable referring to my child as X, Y, and Z, but it's actually not their decision. It should, nothing about us without us. So we need to take that stance. So it's definitely disabled people. It's not a dirty word, and we shouldn't be scared of it.
And I think the other thing is it's just asking, because you can always things change as well. So just the fact you've asked, that's fine by me. That's the bonus. And in my, I don't know if we probably won't have time to get on to conditions, but I have multiple sclerosis and we call ourselves MSers. So if it comes up, I'm an MSer.
And then for me, I mean, I have an invisible disability, as does my younger daughter, and then my older daughter has a very visible disability. And I find for folks with invisible disabilities in particular, they prefer person first language for a variety of reasons. I always go with, again, what people most prefer. In our work, we span about 42 countries, and I would say that we are hearing more, disabled person, but the majority are still going with person first. So that's what we're using. But at the end of the day, whatever you guys want to do, I'm good.
That is a really interesting point when you're creating policy, because naturally in workplaces, they have policies. It's a thing that we do, and making sure you get that terminology right is really key. And we've got a debate coming after this one actually in the agenda around BAME and the use of terminology when it comes to ethnicity as well. And I think it is a really interesting thing to cover, and something that it's great that we're talking about. I think, like you said, as long as people are asking questions and talking about it, then that's really what we want to happen, isn't it?
And actually, I have a question for Mark, because would you be comfortable, you refer to yourself as an MSer, but I wonder if you would be comfortable if others refer to you that way, right? One. And two, I can only imagine that an employer, a large corporation would never want to put that in their, documentation. All our MSers out there.
No, you're very right. So that's kind of a survey that my charity's done, and that's the majority vote.
Yeah.
No, I'd rather be future James Bond. would be my take on. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I'm going to call you James now for the rest of the session.
So I'd now like to ask, aside from the obvious in terms of wheelchair accessibility, bearing in mind that disabilities do come in all guises. What do our panel think really makes an inclusive employer for a disabled person? And if you're able to draw on your own experiences, that would be really great. Mark, can I come to you first? Because I know that you've had experience at Dixon's Car Phone, so I'd be really interested to hear from a sort of retailer perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So to me, I think it's very easy. The word empathy would sum it up. So there's this word that in the UK is reasonable adjustment. So legally, an employer is required to allow access via a ramp, disabled loos, etc., whatever suits the person disabled. But I think an employer that goes above and beyond and goes out of their way to understand an individual's issues and how they can make life better for them is ideal. So in Dixon's case, they dealt with me at diagnosis time as my condition, my MS, progressed, and when it got too serious for me to leave. So on diagnosis, they were empathetic. I disappeared for a couple of weeks to feel sorry for myself. By the time I came back, they'd all educated themselves around what I needed and what I'd be going through, grief, loss, whatever. Then as my condition did progress and I went from walking drunk to walking with a stick to walking with a sexy rollator to being in a wheelchair and having other issues such as fatigue, they started to talk about adapting my role so that we moved from, I was head of PR, so Mr. Fluffy person, lots of drinks in London with journalists, long hours, heavy pressure. But I couldn't do that anymore. And we moved to a social media role, still dealing with the same journalists. That led to some great coverage for the company, our CEO becoming the most followed CEO on FTSE 100 CEO on Twitter, blah, 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 wonderful. So they'd adapted a role that was win-win, worked for me, worked for the company. Fast forward a few years, I was quite ill, needed to leave. And again, they were exceptionally generous. They only needed to give me a little bit, a few months' notice, and they paid me off some nice money just so I could be comfortable leaving. And the upshot there is again win-win. I talk up the company no end, and I left 4 years ago. They don't pay me for it. I'm this ultimate employee advocate for Dixon's Car Phone with no. I think they owe me a coffee now, but yeah, I'm just this huge fan because of the way they were with me.
I think that empathy piece is really key as well, and that's something that comes up with in a lot of my conversations on this theme, that it really is about understanding the lived experience of someone else, and that's kind of the key to inclusivity, really. And Samantha, can I come to you next? What, in your opinion, really makes an inclusive employer for a disabled person?
Yeah, so there's a number of things that I found that on reflection, I thought, gosh, it would have been really great if, the people around me would have done X, Y, and Z. But I'm going to challenge the word empathy. I think we can't really be empathetic until we have a disability ourselves. So maybe change it to the word sympathy. So I think that's my first point. And I think it's to preempt the fact that disabled people have challenges day to day. So for me, I'm a wheelchair user. I have a PA, personal assistant. I've only got limited time with my PA. So it's like gold dust. I've got her for 15 hours a week. And if I don't get everything I need to get done in those 15 hours, I can be left, without food shopping. I can be left, without personal care or just day-to-day assistance. And I work in television, and we all know that television is very fast-paced, particularly news. And what I found in the past is that, there's not been any of that sympathy there. They've not preempt my day-to-day needs. So they will ask me to be on very early in the morning on a morning breakfast show. And I have rearranged my hours with my PA. So she'll get up early, she'll drive over, and then they've cancelled my segment. And then I'm kind of like, okay, so I now need to rearrange my whole week. And it might sound like something really, really simple, but for me, that might mean I might go half a week then without any assistance because I've used all my hours up. So I think it's just, understanding and talking and saying, right, how can we best accommodate your needs, and how can we ensure that actually we're not putting you in out of your way in any way, we're not leaving you high and dry. And I also think a big one for me is extra cost. I'm an ambassador for the charity Scope, which is a pan disability charity, and they did some research on extra costs, and they uncovered the disability price tag, so to speak. That's what they've labelled it. And on average, a disabled person spends £583 extra a month just on the pleasure of being disabled. So what does that look like? This wheelchair that I'm in at the moment, unfortunately, you can't see. It's a manual, bespoke, lightweight wheelchair. This costs £4,500. My electric chair costs £9,000. Now, because I'm not a cute disabled child that people want to donate to, or I can't approach to children's in need anymore, I have to fund all this myself. So living with a disability can cost a lot. Not being able to get on public transport because the underground network is not accessible, but buses that with lifts that are broken. So I will have to, if I want to get from A to B, I will have to pay for expensive taxis. So for me, even just a company saying, do you know what, I'm going to book a taxi for you, and to take that burden away. I am an actress, and I've had to turn down a lot of auditions simply because it would cost me an extortionate amount of money to go just to an audition with no guarantee of even getting the part. So I, had to just say, well, what would I rather have? Pay my bills or potentially get some other work? So you're constantly juggling all these barriers, which come from, let's say what it is, it's systemic ableism ultimately. So it's just identifying the barriers and seeing how you can work together and to tackle them.
I think you're absolutely right what you say. It is sympathy, not empathy. Completely right there. And what you say about talking about it and communicating, that's all you can do if you're somebody who hasn't lived that experience. And maybe, and it's like you said, there's a lot of things that you highlighted there that I think many people watching would never occur. It would absolutely never occur to them. But by asking, you can find out. And I think that's where we've reached a point where the dialogue is starting to happen, and people are starting to be able to talk about it. We just need to encourage more people to do it and for it to become commonplace. Nadine, can I come to you now, because I know that you work with quite a lot of different businesses, so hopefully you've got a kind of slightly wider view on this. What do you think truly makes an inclusive employer?
Well, I love what Samantha, what you said about barriers, right? It's about eliminating barriers of all kinds, because employers tend to think when they do that, it's for someone who uses a wheelchair, which absolutely, but they tend not to think about a variety of other disabilities, whether visible or especially invisible, that they need to eliminate barriers for. So for instance, for someone to apply for a job or even get along within the company, what does their digital accessibility look like? Can someone who is blind, has a visual impairment, can't use a mouse, can't use a keyboard, can they access that? Can they actually apply for a job? Can they navigate the intranet site? Certainly the physical accessibility aspects. But then there's also, you mentioned, Mark, the reasonable adjustment process. I like to say, meet the test of it being fair, equitable, and consistent across the footprint of the enterprise, right? Not good enough just to say we have one, or if someone needs an accommodation or an adjustment, we'll make it. I think also we have these issues of communication and engagement. So disability etiquette and awareness is key. I hear the term often, disability confidence. I believe that you have to be competent before you can be confident, right? So it's about education. As an example, if I go to shake your hand and you have a prosthetic device, do I know what to shake? Or if we're having a conversation and I'm having a conversation with someone who's using a wheelchair, and I stand 5 feet tall on a good hair day, but let's say I was 6 feet tall, right? I don't want you sitting there looking up at the lights to have the conversation. So it's about understanding that engagement. What we have to remember is equality is not the same. Companies tend to think that equality is treating everyone equal. It's not. It's giving everyone an equal access to be successful in that workplace. The other thing that we've seen specifically in retail is we've had retail managers say that in that store, in that storefront, an environment where customers are also present, you have to be very careful about how you refer to your employees who have disabilities, right? Or what, how you are treating them, because the customers pick up on that. And if you're doing something inappropriately, that customer, one of two things is going to happen. Because they know it's wrong, they're not going to come back into your store. Or two, they don't know the difference and they start emulating what they heard you say or do, which is inappropriate. So there's so many different facets to this, which makes it really exciting, but at the same time, really important that the leaders in retail take a step back to understand inclusion. I look at it this way. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, I say diversity is inviting you to my party. Inclusion is asking you to dance, right? We have to ask everyone to dance, and we have to know what dance they like and what music they like. Otherwise, it's not inclusive.
Nadine, you are the second person over the course of us talking about these issues as part of Retail Connected who has referenced that quote, and I think it really does sum it up completely. It's completely correct. I'd like to build on that actually, because talking about leadership and getting leaders to buy into this, I do want to caveat what I'm about to say by acknowledging that there are obviously a lot of invisible disabilities, and that not everyone is necessarily as comfortable as others about being open about this. However, to my knowledge, there are no disabled retail chief execs at present. As such, it's not something a lot of leaders can directly relate to. So again, talking about that kind of empathy piece, it's not something they can easily empathize with. I'd like to ask the panel, do you think that because of this lack of diversity further up the chain, there is still that feeling of awkwardness, of perhaps not really knowing what to say or how to say it when it comes to addressing how disability friendly a workplace is? And is that creating a kind of situation where people are shying away from it? And how do you suggest that we would get over that? I realise I've asked a lot there. Who would like to pitch in and answer that one first?
I mean, I can just say that in our work, we do a lot of executive coaching. If you remember the Disney movie, we're like the little Jiminy Cricket on the shoulder, like behind, right? This is how you treat this. This is how you say this. This is how you approach this. But at the same time, we have many leaders that are not willing to step up and say, I don't know, and actually be willing to take that coaching, right? Or bring it to their leadership team. So it's also on the onus of them to be a true leader, recognize and be open about what they're comfortable with, what they're not, own it, right? We talk a lot about unconscious bias. I think there's a lot of conscious bias. Doesn't mean people are trying to be mean, right? It could be just based on their experiences, but they don't own it. And if you don't own it, I don't care how much training or coaching we give, the behaviors and the language isn't going to change.
Mark, I can see you were about to say something on this. What are your thoughts on how we can get leadership buy-in?
I just wish people weren't scared of us. I know we're, what are we, weird? You don't want to say the word cripple. People with MS don't want to be called MS sufferers. And it can be a minefield for leaders, for everybody. And when you're diagnosed, when I was diagnosed, I noticed some people fading away, partly because maybe they were repulsed by me, but partly probably because they just didn't know what to say and they were scared. So I just always appreciated, and I'll reference that CEO, Sebastian. He's now the CEO of Boots as opposed to Dixon's. But he was willing to engage with me. He was willing to sit down with me at eye level. My wheelchair happens to be a brand called Quickie, and he was willing to make a joke about it. And we can still laugh. We can still have a sense of humor. We can still be sad, grumpy, helpful, productive, all the human words that we're not different in any other way than our disabilities dictate. So it's just having that willingness and that courage sometimes to bridge that gap between, oh, sugar, I might say something wrong. And in our preamble, Jade, you did ask us, and I think I don't mind if somebody makes a mistake, as long as they've tried to, they've asked and they've approached us and they've been curious and not nosy, but just ask the right questions to set the status that they understand that we need some understanding.
I think that's a real key theme that's come up as we've all started talking about allyship. I think allyship has been kind of, one of those real buzzwords of the last year. And it's about people getting out of their comfort zones and saying, I'm not sure what to do. Can I say this? How should I approach this? And being really open about it. I think you're completely right. Samantha, can I come to you for the same question around leadership and kind of how we get buy-in?
Yeah, I mean, we always look to who are the gatekeepers, and I don't think it's just exclusive to disabled people. Gatekeepers often, and forgive if I offend anyone, are white male over the age of 50, 60. And so I think that can isolate a lot of minority groups. And with regards to disability, we need to identify that disabled people are less likely to be employed. Disabled people are less likely to get a degree, because we are still seen as a problem. We're still seen as a problem for society, we're less likely to accommodate the needs. And therefore, many disabled people can't get on the property ladder. They can't get a higher education. They can't make their way up the chain to success, where they can finally get their foot in the door, or their wheel in their door, so to speak, and make change. I'm very privileged in where I am, and I know that I'm one of very few people who is extremely successful. And by gosh, now I've got my wheels in the door. I make everyone very aware of that. But coming back to this idea of equality, we need to get rid of equality and start thinking about equity. So equality, we make policies on a universal level all the time, which is great, because everyone should have the right to, housing, welfare, NHS, health. We should all be aiming for the goal, the overarching goal. But we fail to recognize individual needs. We fail to recognize systemic ableism. So I came across something quite recently, because whenever I deliver talks, I say that, making a more inclusive world doesn't just benefit a small number of people. It doesn't just benefit disabled people. It actually benefits the whole of society. And this is something that we call targeted universalism. So, we still make policies on a universal level, because we all want everyone to live, the same quality of life, but we acknowledge that we're not starting on the same tier, and we need to accommodate that. And how do we do that? By talking and asking what individual needs are. So for example, I advocate a lot for accessible houses, because once I got my accessible flat in London, I became more independent. I got more work. I became a taxpayer, my mental well-being improved. That's a knock-on effect. But not only does accessible homes help disabled people, it helps elderly people, and we've got an aging population. We're all living a little bit longer, but that also means that the likelihood is we will all become disabled at one point in our life. So I think we really need to address equity and equality and start implementing that in everything that we do in our policies. So targeted universalism is a really great way to do that.
I think that's a really pertinent point there as well. Is I've heard it said before, when we lift certain people up, we all get lifted. There's never going to be a scenario where we create a more inclusive workplace and somebody misses out. Like, that's just it's exactly not what inclusivity is. So I think that's unfortunately we are running out of time now, but I think that is a brilliant note to end on. And I think it's been enlightening listening to you all today. And I hope that everybody watching this will really be able to take something away and think a bit more about how those policies that whether it is policies they're creating, or whether it's, you know, whatever, just their day-to-day lives, making sure that that inclusivity and that communication, really, I think that's the main thing that I'm certainly going to take away from this is it's just talking about it. We just need to do more talking about it. But yeah, thank you, Samantha, Mark and Nadine, for joining us today. And I do hope that everybody has enjoyed watching it. Thank you very much.